if anyone doesn't know, do you want to tell everyone sort of really your background just before we get into the nub of it all?
Yeah, well, I've been an FT journalist for, gosh, nearly 15 years now. I was at the Investors Chronicle. Before that, I worked for a property magazine. I, always have loved writing about money, writing about property. Goodness knows why, because it certainly wasn't what I saw myself as doing when I left school. I have been the editor of FT Money, which is the FT Weekend's personal finance supplement, for some time. I've handed a bit of that off to a couple of colleagues now. I'm still writing a column every Saturday, but I'm exploring the consumer world now as the FT's consumer editor. But obviously a lot of that is to do with consumer finance and how we're all customers of the financial system and having to look after ourselves in the future rather than having anybody look after ourselves for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and obviously you and I go back about 5 or 6 years, don't we? When you, for some strange reason, after I sold my financial advice business, you invited me to start writing a regular column, or
I still remember our first meeting in the FT canteen, and I remember being impressed that even though you rubbed shoulders with all of these highfalutin people, you were not above having a cup of FT canteen filtered coffee.
Yes, I thought that it can only get better from here. That was my view. Good. Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you very much for believing in me and asking me to write my little contributions, which is always, appreciated. So here's the thing. Please do put your questions in the box below. If you've got questions that you want to ask of a financial nature, anything to do with your personal finance that you want to ask us, feel free. There are no silly questions. We've got a couple that have already come in, which we will tackle. But I think before we get into specific questions, Claire, do you want to just share with people, because you've been on my podcast, Real Money Stories, before, and I love some of the insights you gave there and the humanity and the humility that you gave. What have you learned about money and the role of money in people's lives in all these years that you've been on your own journey, but also with all the people that you've interacted with, the readers that you've spoken to, the people you've met in financial services, the tax makers, the politicians? You've got a wealth of experience there. So let's tap into that before we get into questions.
Well, I think for me, the biggest conundrum is how do you get these very important financial messages through to people who either think finance, not for me, or think finance, can't be bothered, I've got better things to do. And that's probably about, a good sort of 75% of the population. Then you've got people who just feel like they can't engage with their finances for whatever reason. Maybe they've got a mental health issue. Obviously, there's lots of that going on under the pandemic. And what I've always been about is just giving people the confidence to ask questions about their own money. I'm constantly saying to my stepchildren, well, it's your money. If you want to make sure that, I can remember the first time my stepdaughter bought something at John Lewis and told me that she'd got a discount because she'd noticed that it was damaged and she'd asked for 10% off, and when she sort of like got her first student flat, and I thought, I've taught her well. But that's a very small example. But then bigger examples could be thinking, well, how am I going to start a pension, or why should I start putting money into an ISA, and why should I choose a stocks and shares one over a cash one, on how on earth do I do that? And it's kind of getting beyond the worried wealthy or the worried well off, which fortunately for the FT, that's where a lot of their readers come in. But why I like doing things like the podcast and LBC, I'm on LBC radio a few times a week with Eddie Mayer, is that I'm reaching a different audience who have got much more to lose, frankly, if they make the wrong money decision, and much more to gain if they make the right one. So doing that in a way that people can think, oh yeah, I understand that now, that for me is my mission in life.
And I remember working with you on a BBC programme once where it was all about trying to help people make smart decisions. And this particular case was a lovely lady who had a problem controlling spending. That was essentially what it was. And actually at the root of a lot of her problems were that she was associating spending with meeting a need in her life that she obviously, was trying to fill. And that is a problem for a lot of people, isn't it? That spending, or what they do for work, or how they choose to deal with their money, is by definition an extension of who they feel they are as a person, don't they? So I mean, what do you think? What's your feelings on how people can break a negative cycle or a negative attitude about dealing with their finances and the role of money in their life?
Well, I get lots of people, friends and, throughout my working life, because, don't forget, I haven't been a finance journalist forever. I was a property journalist for about 8 years. And even then people would say to me, oh, what do I do? I've never got any money in my bank account at the end of the month. And I've always had quite a sort of a forensic attitude to these things. Not always, because I had some bad experiences when I was younger, particularly when I was a student, that kind of frightened me into thinking, well, actually, I don't want to be in a situation where the money's run out and I don't know where it's coming from. So, and I've never been shy about fighting my corner and, campaigning if I think, that I've been ripped off or I've got a bad deal on things. Definitely. Asking a landlord for a rent reduction because we had mice, all of those kinds of things. So I would encourage anybody listening who is feeling perhaps that their finances are a bit out of control. The hardest thing and the easiest thing is to just engage, just to look at how you're spending. Now, it's so easy to do that nowadays with apps. You don't need to do your own Excel spreadsheet. I do my own Excel spreadsheet. I wish that I was as good at formulas as some of my colleagues in the FT's IT department are, because they're frankly, so I'm impressed by anyone who can do stuff really well on Excel. I think it's an amazing skill to have. But just understanding what you've got and the patterns in your spending, but also allowing yourself to spend on some things. Now, I mean, whenever you see me, doing anything for the FT, I've always got one of these mugs, which I collect, and they've all got birds on. I'm very into birds and bird watching, which in itself is quite a cheap hobby, unless you get into the photography and the binoculars end of things. But yes, I have been buying myself the odd bird mug or 6 under lockdown, but that's because I allow myself to spend so much. It's like dieting. It's unrealistic to say, oh, well, I'm only going to spend £1 a day for the rest of my life, or I'm only going to eat, one lettuce leaf and a prawn or whatever for my dinner in order to make the pounds magically melt away. I have tried that, by the way, and it doesn't work. So it's all about just knowing your limits and looking for the patterns in your spending that could signify something's going a bit wrong.
And I think they're all right. There's this issue of not feeling guilt, shame, or embarrassment about your financial position, or you should have done better, or whatever it is. And I think the pandemic, certainly in my experience, because as you know, I do loads of wellbeing talks every week to hundreds of people, and I get the immediate questions at the end, so it gives me a real good sense of what's going on. Is I think what for many people, COVID or the pandemic, if they were exposed a little bit before or slightly not quite ahead of the curve, this really exposed the weaknesses in their finances. And also for those that their finances weren't exposed, as they weren't vulnerable or on the edge, they've realized how much money they were wasting, right? But it's not about shame or guilt or embarrassment. It's about, I think you're right, what we've seen over the years is that the single biggest wealth creating tool you have is your income initially. But secondly, it's what you choose to do with that income determines whether you build real wealth and whether you will have to work till you drop or whether money will work for you. So look, thank you for that, Claire. Look, I've got a couple of questions I want to start with. Please do put questions in the box. Very, very happy to take them. Don't put them in the normal question box. Just put them in the comments box and I will get to them. I've got a couple here, particularly good ones that have been sent in earlier before, so thank you for that. But do put your questions in there and we'll get to the previous ones that have been there. Now, this lady is 41. She said, I finally reached the stage in my life where I have a decent income from a steady job. I've got no debt except for my mortgage, a healthy emergency fund, and a small amount invested in a stocks and shares ISA. My question is this, and just by the way, neither Claire nor I can give personal financial advice. Anything we say is all about our opinion, what we might do or what you could do or what might be on the horizon. If you're in any doubt, take advice from a professional advisor, just to make that clear. So her question is, what should I do now? 1, should I overpay my mortgage as quickly as possible? B, invest in more stocks and shares in my ISA? Or C, consider buying another property to rent out? Now, I think the caveat there is it depends, right? So do you want to sort of take that first of all and then I can chip in?
Yeah, because I think this is a really common dilemma, especially for people. I'm a little bit older than the lady in question. I think it's Donna. If it's you, hello, thank
Donna,
you
yeah.
for sending in the question. I'm 43 or 44 next month, and I looked at this a while ago because I was overpaying my mortgage, and I had been doing so for about 7 or 8 years. And I do have a financial advisor who I go and see occasionally. I'm not one of those people who uses them. I haven't got a huge portfolio that they take a percentage fee for managing, but I found it really helpful to chat it through with him. And he said, well, look, your mortgage rate is ridiculous because it's something like 0.4% above the base rate. I've got a lifetime tracker. So he said, like, the amount of money it's costing you to have that debt is really negligible, but the amount of money that you could gain by potentially investing it or putting it into your pension on a net basis is much higher. So that's something you should consider. Now, I noticed that Donna didn't mention the word pension, I don't think, in any of that. But for me, as a higher rate taxpayer, somebody who earns more than £50,000 a year, which I'm very lucky and grateful to have, I can get tax relief of 40%, which is the same as the income tax I would pay on that income, if I hive that money off and put it into my pension. Now, on the downside, yes, I get an instant 40% uplift on it. I also get a 200% uplift on it because the FT, bless them, double match what I put in up to a certain extent. So I get like a really good bang for my buck. But on the downside, I can't now get hold of that money when they change the law until I'm 57. It's going to go up the rate, the age that you can access your pension from 55 to 57 for people who are now of our age in our early 40s. So it is the reward that you get for locking your money away for a long time. And of course, you are taking investment risk. You know, there's no guarantee that you'll get all of that money back again. But in terms of like how can you maximize it the most, I would say company pension definitely worth checking out. Even if you're self-employed and you don't get those employer contributions, the tax relief alone could be valuable.
And I think that if I just chip in on that, absolutely right. If there's free money from the employer, if there's higher tax relief, and don't forget, of course, some people who are claiming child benefit who are in that 50 to 60,000 pounds income bracket, you start losing your child benefit until you don't get any once you hit 60,000, and it's graduated from 50. So actually making a pension contribution can also get you your child benefit back, or some of it back, or all of it back if you make a big enough contribution. So each person's different. All I would say
and
here,
also
though,
important to say, people who are earning a bit more, because as soon as you start to earn over more than £100,000, then the government starts to taper away that £12,500 tax-free allowance, the personal allowance that you get. So you could have somebody earning between 100,000 and 127,000, I think. The
60% effective rate.
Yeah, effectively you're paying 60% tax on that slice of your earnings. But if you're paying more money into your pension, then you can stay out of that club.
But I think there's an interesting point about this, Donna's question. It's this issue about overpaying the mortgage versus investing. And I just want to deal with that because I don't have a mortgage, and I don't say that to brag. I mean, I just made the decision. I paid that off because I didn't want it. And even though I had monies aside that could be arguably invested better, it makes no economic sense for me to pay my mortgage off, because I think at the time I was paying about 1.5%. Makes no sense at all. Okay. And arguably, I should have, whatever it was, 100,000 or whatever the number was, 80,000, I should have just used that in another business or another activity that I'm involved in. You know, I've got all sorts of different business interests. But from my point of view, it wasn't about what was the best mathematical return. For me, Jane and I, my wife, we made a commitment when I was 30. We did a financial plan, and one of our 3 key metrics was to be mortgage free. Okay, to own the house that we live in, even if it's not efficient. That was one of our things. No payments. So anything else mad I do with business or angel investing or any of that stuff, it's kind of like it's on my watch. And this is important. If you've got a partner, you need to talk through what your priorities are. You need to talk through what your idea of risk is, what your idea of opportunity is, what's the worst that can happen, how do you feel about your finances. It's not just the mathematics. And if you put money in a pension, no matter how good it is, if you've just started a business on the side that needs more capital, but that could make 20 times the pension if you get it right. So everyone is different. So it's not always the conventional things. But again, don't give up free money for no thing. So I think with her, it really depends on what she would do with the money. And don't confuse the tax wrapper, i.e. a pension or an ISA, with actually what you invest it in. Yeah. Here we go. Now that's another question here. Was this was a question from John. Doesn't say what his name is. He just says here, is it true that SIPs can be transferred to our children tax-free? Now, I think what he's talking there is I think you have to die. I think he's talking about that bit, the inheriting by dying as opposed to just transferring it to them.
Yes, and dying before the age of 75, which is
great.
rather...
It's really good from a tax point of view.
Well, exactly. I mean, this was something when there was a big shake-up to the pensions rules a few years ago called pension freedoms, which basically meant when you retire, you don't have to buy an annuity. You can basically move your pensions money around. And if you've got what most of us have, a DC pension or defined contribution pension, that's like a pot of money that will eventually run out one day. They introduced this strange quirk that it could pass to your immediate heirs if you died before the age of 75 with no inheritance tax, which is one of those things that, you know, pensions experts say to me, you know, like, why did they put this in? Other pensions experts say to me, well, when will they take it away? But I think that it's like with all of these things, anything to do with inheritance tax, it's kind of not going to be your problem after you've gone. And these making a financial decision today based on a kind of strange rule that could be sort of changed or rescinded at some point in the future, because goodness knows what tax rises they're going to have to bring in the next sort of 3 to 5 years to cope with the coronavirus pandemic and the vast cost of it. I mean, I can't see that quirk being one that will necessarily survive for much longer. Obviously, capital gains tax is a big one that everyone's looking out for in the budget this year. But before I start boring on about the budget, another thought has occurred to me about the lady Donna who wanted to overpay her mortgage. Now, if you overpay your mortgage, getting that money back again if you need it in a hurry, say, for example, you lose your job and you've been made redundant.
Yep.
I have a friend who this happened to, and she kind of naively assumed that she had all of this money in her property, she had lots of equity, she'd be able to, you know, unlock some by remortgaging. But because she'd lost her job, she wasn't able to remortgage. So that's another risk to bear in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And mortgage lending is the cheapest borrowing you'll ever have. So in order of kind of the last loan you probably pay off is your mortgage, and probably a student loan. So in other words, it depends what you're paying and when you're in this thing. But you've got to anticipate what's the worst that can happen. If you approach your finances with what's the worst that can happen, right? And then plan for that, because as sure as I mean, I know this. There was a young lady who follows me who just said, "Oh, I'm thinking of buying a house. What do you think?" And this was in February. I said, "Well, we've got this Corona thing happening, and I'm not sure I'd be wanting to rush to buy a house straight away. But anyway, be very careful what you pay for it, right? And make sure, because it's a first house." I said, "Just make sure you got plenty in your emergency fund." Actually, as it turns out, in November this year, they had woodworm, which I had to put right, and it cost them £16,500. So they had to go and borrow more money. So, you know, just be very careful. Thinking about the downside will always protect you, even if you really think you want to do something. Okay, so this other question here is from John. It said here, should we expect well, there's two things here. Should we expect an increase in inheritance tax in the new budget announcement next month? If we're debt-free, what should our order of investments be? Pension first or ISA?
Well, we kind of covered that a little bit in the last question. I mean, in terms of what might come out of the budget, I think that a lot of people obviously are worried about tax rises, and Rishi Sunak's under an awful lot of pressure to continue, you know, supporting the economy by, you know, pumping as much money as possible into things like the furlough scheme, you know, which you would hope might be extended, supporting the self-employed better, and limited company directors. We get a word in for them, you know, many of whom have seen, you know, not a penny of additional support beyond benefits or the bounce back loan that they might be able to claim. So I think it will be some time before a Conservative government would be confident enough that the electorate would be with them on tax rises. But the thing that surprised me about wealth taxes in general, we did a poll in the FT in the summer, around sort of July, August time, and we asked readers, you know, bearing in mind one of the media surveys we did said that the average FT Money reader had like getting onto £1 million in investable assets. So they would be, falling squarely into the scope of some of the types of different wealth taxes that have been discussed. More than half of them were in favour of a one-off wealth tax because they considered themselves to be the lucky few who hadn't been affected by the pandemic to such a great an extent. But unfortunately, when you look at the maths of this, there aren't very many people who are that wealthy and or willing to stump up. And if you really want to move the needle on tax revenues, then doing things like freezing the personal allowance threshold instead of letting it rise with inflation, which affects absolutely everyone, or changing the rate of income tax, which of course the Conservatives in their manifesto have pledged not to do, or raising the rate of VAT. So I think it's unlikely that they'll do any sort of manifesto pledge breaking, but I would expect there to be an awful lot of consultations launched at the budget, which you and I can pore over on March the 3rd and work out what the import of those might be eventually.
And I think the way to look at it is, look, taxes will go up. Okay, this is the answer. We don't know where, we don't know when. It is going to happen. But at the end of the day, here's the thing: is we'll get through it like we always have. I've been around, I've been doing stuff like you have for many, many years. We've seen everything possible, every permutation, and we'll cope with it and we'll get around it. It won't be pleasant. There'll be some unintended consequences. But here's the thing: you have to focus on moving forward. Now, there's a couple of questions I want to just get to here from our audience tonight. Thank you. By the way, if you've got a question, any money-related question, please put it into the comments box and I'll get to it and we'll try and answer it as we can. So let's look at the first one here. We got here. Let me just get to it. Do you feel the existing wealth management financial industry is best positioned to service this upcoming generation who stand to inherit the most money at all? I think he was referring to a tweet or a blog or something, or an article I'd written recently. So what do you think of that? Is there is the financial industry well served to help this transfer of wealth, which is going to come over the coming decade or so?
Well, I think that they're all, licking their lips and thinking about how best they can smarm up to, the children of their wealthy clients and kind of justify, why they should continue to perhaps use the same firm that their mum and dad have always used. But I think the more pressing problem, for millennials, I'm too old to be a millennial, but and even for Gen Z, the people who are coming up below that, there's a huge appetite for financial advice, but there's not a lot of desire from the industry to provide it to people who haven't made a lot of money yet, because the kind of standard model, not in every single part of the industry, but of a lot of different parts of the industry, is that people want to take a percentage of your portfolio for helping manage your investments. That's what an awful lot of traditional independent financial advisors are about. Now, it's certainly not all of them. My own person who I go and see, I can pay on an ad hoc basis. There are things that you need a financial advisor to buy, like different types of health insurance. That's another way that I've used financial advice. I mean, if you're doing certain things with pensions, then you need to get financial advice. Whether you have somebody who's like a retained advisor is up to you. Now, what I would say gives me hope for the future is that under lockdown, the financial advice industry has been forced into using digital in a way that it never has before. Yeah. And frankly, that's a lot, it's a much cheaper way of delivering things. And if you look at financial planners, that's a real, growth area at the moment. So they're not telling you what investments to choose or what decisions to make necessarily. They're looking at, the whole of your life. How can you reach your money goals, and what kind of, tax implications should you be considering? Like, what's your kind of path through getting you through life and getting your money to work for you? I mean, a lot of the people who are qualified to do that aren't necessarily part of a big firm. And whereas before they might have had to rent an office to service their clients, if they can do it from home, it could also be a really good way of getting more women into the financial advice professions. It's always puzzled me why there aren't more, because
unbelievable.
I think women are really well suited to this, and certainly there are a lot of women who would benefit from advice and who actively want to seek it. And I can remember a dear colleague of mine, she's left the newspaper now. She inherited an awful lot of money at the age of about 58 because both of her parents died within quick succession of each other, which was really traumatic. But all of a sudden, she had several £1 million. And she came into to my office and said, you know, who do you think I could actually go and see, because I need some help managing this? And a lot of the firms that she went to see, she was disgusted by the way that they spoke to her, you know, imagining that she didn't know anything because she didn't tell them where she worked, the coy carp sort of effect, you know, like glitzy receptions. And she thought, well, you know, well, my money will be paying for all of this. And she was really turned off by it. She didn't meet a single woman on any of these meetings. And eventually she went with a female advisor who I put her in touch with over the phone, who was actually based in the north of England. This was years and years before lockdown happened. But now, you know, we have got much more choice as consumers, and we've got a lot more options. So let's hope the finance industry comes up with some better choices for us.
And I think what I would just say to that point as well is there are a number of firms that are now have got split offerings. So, for instance, friends of mine who run Balance Wealth Management in the Nottingham area, they also have a sub-brand called Neon, which is all about the subscription-based. You can speak to real people. It's all virtual. Whereas Balance is for the more complicated, multi-estate stuff. So I think, and then you've got people like Claer Money coming on board, various new entrants and also existing entrants who are doing sub-brands. So I think they will get there. But here's the thing, if it's behavior change you need, and mindset change, go and see a trained, qualified money coach. If it's financial planning you need, make sure you're using a financial planner who is charging you for financial planning and will do scenario planning with you and will connect the emotional side with the resources. And, you know, people come to me when I was a financial planner and say, okay, it's 5,000 quid for the year, but there's a lot of work there. It sounds a lot of money, but isn't really, because you're tapping into all that experience, all that infrastructure, and we know how to help you. We know the questions to ask you. So here's another one here. This one is from Tennis from Teddington, a regular. What do you feel is the biggest barrier to creating wealth or a strong financial position? What's your thoughts on that, Claire?
Oh, well, before I answer that one, I should say hello to all of the female financial planners and financial advisors who are saying we're here on your Facebook feed. I know if I gave the impression that there weren't any female financial advisors, that was not what I intended to do. But I am just surprised that there aren't more. But your question reminds me was...
Oh, the question was, what do you feel is the biggest barrier to creating wealth or a strong financial position? And by the way, thank you for everyone for joining tonight. Really appreciate it.
The biggest barrier? I think fear. A lot of the time. I nearly didn't join the Financial Times as a reporter because they originally were only offering me a 6-month contract. And I thought, well, I've got 3 stepchildren. I'm living with my partner. How will I afford the mortgage payments if instead of having a full-time job, all of a sudden I'm catapulted into a situation where I'm scrabbling for work as a freelancer? And that was a really, really tough decision for me, because the thought of taking a big risk like that, as much as the reward on offer was tempting, I just thought, I can't put myself in this position. I can't, you know, go back to my parents cap in hand and say, oh, you know, can I move back in with you? And I think that a lot of people may, you know, it might not be the offer of a job that's a risk. It could be leaving full-time work to set up your own company. Now, that is something that I wouldn't say that I've longed to do it, because I've never come up with an idea good enough where I've thought, actually, this could work. But I could totally see myself doing that. And I think that it would be, you know, amazing fun. Certainly you've done it, Jason. But it's one of those things where, would I actually have the balls, frankly, to say, right, you know, I'm going to take a risk? And it's a similar kind of thing with investing. You know, you're taking a risk. Now, you can say it's a calculated risk. You can invest money that you can sort of afford to lose, quote unquote, because you've already, you know, allowed for all of your bill payments to come out. You've thought about, you know, building up an emergency fund, all of the things that, you know, sensible people will tell you to do. But it still feels like a risk. And, you know, when the pandemic happened and stock markets crashed, I would be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about, you know, selling off some assets and, you know, liquidating some money in my ISA. The only thing that stopped me from taking profits was the thought that a lot of the money that I do have invested, because I've got a lifetime ISA, I squeaked in to that one by 6 days. So I can't get the money out of that until I'm 60. And obviously I can't get the money out of my pension until I'm 57. So you kind of think, well, that's an awfully
Limbo
long,
land.
it's an awfully long way away. So, it sort of prevents you from wanting to tinker too much. But it is still, fear, I think, is the biggest thing that leads people to make quick decisions, and the snap decisions, unfortunately, aren't always the right ones.
Well, this thing I would just comment and add to that. Very good points there. But Tennis for Teddington, that's a good question. I think it depends. But I think what I see and what I experience, and I've had myself in my own life, the biggest single barrier, okay, is squandering or not using the income that you're creating to do the right things with it. If you spend all your money on consumption, or you spend it on crap, or you spend it on stuff to impress other people or junk, I'm not saying don't have fun. I'm just saying, if you choose to spend the income, which is your biggest wealth creation tool you've got, okay, and you don't accumulate assets, stuff that produces cash flow, stuff that is helping you, and that may not even be buying a house that you live in. It could be, my latest blog is talked about this. Should you buy or should you rent? And the jury's out, and it really depends. It's not always a good case to buy your own home. It doesn't always make economic sense, but it might make emotional sense. So I think the single biggest barrier there, just to answer that one, is how you choose to allocate your income between consuming stuff now that has gone forever and buying and accumulating cash flow producing assets. That's my view anyway. Okay, there's another question we got here. So please keep them coming in. We'll get right. Bit of fun here. Both of you, would you predict the FTSE? And they said it's a bit of fun, by the way. FTSE 100 at the year end. Are you bullish, bearish, and your reasons, please?
Well, I would like to think that it would have a very good year. I know that a lot of the companies that are, majored on the UK FTSE 100 index are international companies headquartered in Britain. But I do think that, British companies and, of course, the British economy has been really heavily pounded by Brexit. I think that the government has had a hospital pass on this because of COVID. Whenever I look at the GDP figures, we had some, really nasty figures last week. And my question is, well, how much of that is to do with Brexit, and how much of it is to do with the coronavirus? And of course, it's impossible to tell, but people who I speak to in business, particularly people who are running small businesses, are really finding it tough to just get their heads around the sheer amount of administration, extra admin that they have to do. It's not been an easy transition process. And I think trying to manage anything like this when you've got a country under lockdown, economic policy, being written as fast as it's implemented. I mean, in many ways, the government have done an amazing job, but in many ways, they've done, frankly, an absolutely hopeless job. And it's really business people right now, and we still don't know truly how that's going to play out. But I would really hope that, bargain Britain, as some of the investment commentators are saying, that we do get this bounce back. Because frankly, I think it's what this country needs. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Great guy for you to follow is a guy called John Houseman. Very, very contrarian investment guy. He understands economics. His blog is worth reading. If you look, he believes, an inflection point, like we were in 1929, 1987. He's been pretty good at this. It's not about calling the market. It's not about market timing, because all of us are funding for a 50, 60, 70-year period. So when we tune out the noise and look back enough, we'll see that pretty much capitalism, one way or another, if we get this climate change thing sorted out and other things, inequality, that essentially is a trajectory that goes up, but it's punctuated by very severe periods. And if you invested in the early 1970s, I used to teach clients this, I take them through. You invested £100,000 in 1972. By 1974, that £100,000 was worth £32,000. Okay. Now, the patient investor who didn't think we were going to hell in a handcart, and look up, if you're not sure, let's Google it, right, about the 70s. I grew up in it, and I tell you, we lived it in black and white. That's how bad the 70s were, right? Because I was born in 69. And if you'd have bailed out then, you would have missed a big rally that would have got your money back to what it originally, your original nominal value by about 1979 or 1980. You would have just about got back to where you were, or actually 78 it was. And then by 1982, you would have got your money back plus inflation. And so what really, my answer to that question is, if I was a betting man, I would say that the FTSE 100 probably has to be lower. Okay, because it's not even about economics, because there is latent loads of demand built up, and post-corona we're all going to want to go and see everyone we've never seen and partying forever and going to Rio and you name it. We'll do about 4 holidays in about a month. So there is a lot of pent-up demand, but I think what will happen is there is such a fracture to the economy, and there is such a groundswell of people who are in a worse situation. It acts as almost like a break. So I would say in the short term, it's a very high chance of markets it's falling, but don't let that worry you, because if you're investing long term and you're investing regularly, it probably doesn't matter. If you're just about to take your pension pot, you might want to take some advice about how to perhaps change that and then reorientate yourself into the markets, because if you start taking out money out of a pension regularly and it has a real bad 2 or 3 years at the beginning, that can really affect you. But in the long run, in the very long run, with income reinvested, we'll probably be okay. So the issue really is if you're going to need that money over the next 2 to 3 years, and it happens when some other trigger comes to affect it. But for every argument of why it should go up, there'll be arguments why it should go down. The key is tune out the noise and do you believe in capitalism? So, okay, there's another one here, Claire. Let's just have a look at this one. This one is...
I've been sent one as well about pensions.
Oh, what's that then? Go on then.
Oh, okay. So this is from a very nice lady. She's in her late 20s. I'll call her Kay because that's her first name. She says, I want to move organisation from a local authority to higher education, but I'm worried about paying into a brand new pension pot. Will it negatively affect my retirement fund if I've got 2 pots that are both workplace pensions? I don't want to screw this up. Well, I mean, that's a really interesting question, I think, because there's so much that people really don't know about pensions. I can remember in my first ever job saying that I didn't want to be in the company pension because I only thought I'd be there for a year. And, you know, I was there for more than 6 years. So that was a really bad mistake. I did get on the housing ladder in that time with the money I was putting aside. So it could be worse. But, I mean, Jason, how would you explain this kind of multi-pot pension conundrum?
So she's in local government and she's going to be moving to a university, is that right?
To higher education, yeah.
Okay, well, it's slightly different. Okay, so, well, both of them will be final salary schemes, I'm sure. That's a defined benefit where you accrue a guaranteed amount of pension. I'm not sure if the transfer club is a term that determines people in public sector type pension schemes normally can move them around without detriment and sort of get accruals in the other scheme. I'm not sure if it applies because I don't know where in higher education she is, whether it's a university or whether it's a college. There's a slight difference there. But essentially, what she's got to look at, I think, is in evaluating the new job, she's got to say to herself, why is she moving? And how will her future pension accrual change? So what she's already built up is protected, and that will be revalued between now and when she takes benefits. When she joins the new scheme, assuming she can join the final salary scheme, and again, I'm not sure exactly who she's working for, then she will be accruing benefits in the new scheme of some form. But there may be different benefit accruals between their old scheme that she's in, and depends when she joined that scheme, because even public sector schemes they've moved from final salary to career average, etc., and the new scheme. So as part of looking at her new conditions, she needs to look not just at the salary and the holiday and the work she's doing, but she's also got to look at what pension is she accruing. Is it better or worse? Now, the decision on whether to transfer the old pension into the new pension, she can only really do that, one, when she's joined the new scheme, and 2, when she's aware and she's asked the new scheme what they would give her for transferring in. And that's an example of where you probably do want to pay a fixed fee to a financial advisor who's a pension specialist to give you advice on leave it there or move it into the new scheme. For the sake of paying £400 or £500, I think that's a decision that she probably wants to look at there.
And certainly for people who've got less generous pensions, the defined contribution ones, DC, that I mentioned earlier, where you've got, you're building up a pot of money and you can invest that, start to take it in retirement, but eventually it will run out. They're the sort that I have. Now, obviously, every job that you start, particularly with this new rule called auto-enrolment, you automatically get opted into the pension scheme. So that would have saved me in my 20s, because I wouldn't have been given a choice. Do you want to pay money into this pension or not? I just would have been registered in it, and I probably wouldn't. I would have just had a bit less money to spend down the pub, frankly. But we'll skirt over this terrible mistake that I made at that tender age. But if you move jobs, then you've still got that pension. You're not contributing to it anymore, but it's still invested. And I think a lot of people think, well, when I leave a job, that pension is somehow, it sort of withers on the vine. It's not. You really need to stay in touch with the people who administrate your company pension schemes, keep track of them. You can still have a login. You can still change your investment choices. Obviously, you can't change the amount that you're paying in because you're not paying in any money to them anymore. But it is possible to move them, consolidate them. That's been a big trend recently. People who've got 4 or 5 smaller pension pots, because the average person who starts work now can expect to have maybe 10 or 11 different employers over the course of their working life, and that's assuming, frankly, that they're going to be in full-time, paid employment rather than working for themselves, which has also been a huge trend in the last decade. So there are lots of different choices that you can have with these pensions, but the most important thing is say yes and pay in.
And if you have got old pensions, then generally speaking, you want to be looking at, if you can get them all in one pot, whether that's with your existing workplace or consolidate all the previous ones into a better scheme that sits aside. Just look at the charges and look at the investment choices. And one of the things I find when I ask people, where is your pension fund invested and what are the charges on the fund? They look at you like you've come from Mars. So just do that and know where your money's invested. Quick one here, a tongue-in-cheek question. It says asking an advisor. Well, we're not regulated advisors. We don't make our money out of selling financial advice. So you can ask us this anyway. It says, if an advisor is worth it similar to asking a barber? Oh, hang on. Is asking an advisor if an advisor is worth it similar to asking a barber if you need a haircut? Asking this in a tongue-in-cheek way. That's Peter Walton, who's a regular follower of mine. So I mean, just the question there is well, we're not advisors and we don't sell advice. I think we've answered that question, Claire, haven't we? That really it depends if it's a complicated situation, if you're unsure, if the cost of the fee is more than outweighed by the value that they're going to bring from avoiding silly decisions or hopefully maximising returns. It just depends, doesn't it?
Yeah, but also, financial advice is a service industry, and most financial advisors, financial planners too, for that matter, will be happy to engage with you, certainly for the first meeting, for free. And frankly, if they're doing it over Zoom, it's probably easier for you. You don't have to have the rigmarole of going into an office. So if you're, my advice about finding advice, if you like, would be go and see more than one person, go and see lots of different people, make sure that you're very clear on how they would charge you, and what charges, how those charges will be applied, because there are lots of different ways that can happen, and the kind of things that they can help you with, and what are the testimonials that they've had from other clients. Now, I found out about my financial advisor because I asked my boss at the time who he used, and he gave me a recommendation. I spoke to some other people as well, but I liked what I saw, so I went ahead. And I think that a lot of people are quite shocked that I have a financial advisor. I've mentioned this a few times before, and people have said, oh, well, don't you know us all anyway? You write the FT Money page every week. And I've said, well, this is the whole point. If you think you know it all, you can't know it all. It's always like an article that you write for a newspaper is always better if another pair of eyes have had a good look over and edited it, or two in the case of the FT. It has to be edited by not one but two people. And my goodness, you know, when you get sent all the queries, that's always a bit of a jaw-dropping
Tell me about
moment.
it. Tell me about it.
Until recently, you were having them sent through from me, but I always thought I was quite nice about changing things around. But you know, not all editors are like that. So you can always benefit from having the perspective of another person, and that goes for any financial problem. And it's really difficult often for people to talk about money, but I think it's a bit like counselling. Sometimes it's easier to talk to somebody who's, you know, a comparative stranger compared to talking to necessarily, you know, a family member.
And I agree. And I would just say, having been an advisor for many years when I was one, I don't think I was particularly user-friendly, right? I have to admit. I don't think I was the most patient advisor. But I had a lot of things on my plate. You know, I wasn't just an advisor. I was doing all sorts of things. I was running businesses and stuff. So if you are, I would suggest this. All the people who get ahead in life always have a coach, a mentor, a helper, someone in their corner. Now, whether that is, you know, a best friend who's really interested in money, whether that, but the thing about a qualified financial planner, if you are paying for a proper planning service, whether that's one-off or an ongoing subscription or some kind of ongoing commitment, it's got to be someone who you've got to remember you get on with, that you feel comfortable with. Not that you're bamboozled by, you think, oh, they've got a nice car or a nice house or whatever, but it's got to be someone you feel has got empathy, who's got your best interests at heart. And I would always say that that person has been through this many times before, not in their own life, but with their clients. So when, for instance, I had one of my clients, her husband died at the age of 43, it was devastating for her, but it was not the first time I'd gone through this. Okay, so I could obviously empathize with her. Same as when someone suddenly sold their business for several £1 million, having been living on beans and toast for years. I knew what was going to happen, and I had gradually educated them as to what was going to happen once the deal had gone through, what the positions they would go through mentally, physically, emotionally. Everyone wants to be a friend. So advisors can be good when it comes to unfamiliar territory, or when you're feeling out of your depth, or when you're feeling a bit exposed, but you've got to find the right one, and you've got to find a firm whose charging basis is aligned with your best interests. So that's why I always recommend always using fixed fee or hourly based or subscription based advisors, not these people who charge you on an asset based fee, because otherwise the portfolio is the client, not you. So another good question here this is from Peter, I think, Mabel's Gold. Shall I pay off my student debt? Mine's 14k at 2.16%, and I have no other debts. Unsure how to calculate whether to contribute the minimum or to try to clear it off. I graduated in 2018, so it's recent. What's your thoughts on that, Claire?
Well, this is a really complicated question to answer because there are all sorts of different student loans. Now, if your interest rate is only 2.1%, then it sounds like you know, I would have expected you to have graduated a few years before that. Now, the reason I say this is because two of my stepchildren, one of them went to university and graduated around, I think, 2006, and she was in that cohort of people whose loans were, you know, they didn't have to borrow as much. It wasn't when £9,000
still had grants.
The norm.
Yeah,
exactly. So she has ended up with, I think, about sort of 12,000 odd of student debt, whereas my stepson, who did a 4-year course when tuition fees were much higher, he's ended up with you know, nearly 40,000, which is huge. So when it comes to looking at these debts, the most important thing to remember is student debt is not like normal debt. This is essentially a tax on your future earnings. You are going to be repaying, I think, 9% of a band of earnings above about £25,000.
26,750, I think.
It goes up with inflation. Sorry, I'm just a bit perturbed because my little flasher came up saying you've only got 5 minutes left on Instagram, because I try and limit myself to an hour a day. But so if I disappear, I'll dial back in.
Yeah, we'll bring it to an end, don't worry. Yeah.
So you shouldn't think of it as something that has to be disappeared at all costs, because in all likelihood, you know, the majority of students who graduate are never going to pay back their student loan in its entirety. They're going to be paying a higher tax rate for the rest of their lives. But after 30 years, under the current rules, your student debt disappears. So a lot of it's going to depend on how much you earn. If you're earning more than, I think, about £45,000 from when you graduate, and you get a pay rise that keeps pace with inflation every year, and you may be among the minority of people who will pay their loan back in full, so it could make more sense for you to pay it back early. But it's very hard to predict these kinds of things.
Yeah, I good answer. I would say go to Save the Student. Go to the Save the Student website.
Very good.
It's got a fantastic explanation of all the pre-2012 scheme, the post-2012 scheme, and the latest scheme. Basically, if you the way to look at it is if you're going to be a high earner and you know that's going to happen over short order, right, and you're never going to need to borrow money anywhere from anyone else, probably overpay it early. But most other people, it should be the last thing they need to worry about because it's a contingent income tax. And particularly if you are thinking of having career breaks or lower earning or any of that stuff, I wouldn't be rushing to do it. But the Save the Student Fund is a great one there. Tamzin, good friend of mine, Tamzin, brilliant top divorce financial planner. She makes the point that good financial planners have their own financial planner because you can't hold yourself to account. Right, we're almost running out of time. What's the likelihood of the government changing the rule? We don't know. Sorry. Thoughts on robo-advisors? No idea. There's loads of them out there. They're a good thing, I'm sure, for many people. But here's the thing. Make sure you're getting advice, not you're just having an automated buying and investment experience. That's what I would say there. So look, we haven't got any more time there we're finishing up. We're on the hour. It's gone in seconds. Claire, what do you want to leave everyone with as your final parting thoughts on this Shrove Tuesday evening?
Yeah, well, the only pancakes I've had today have had duck in them, despite my love.
Nice.
I'm eating them even more. I would say if you like what you've heard tonight from me and from Jason, do sign up and have a listen to my Money Clinic podcast. There's an episode which I'm going to share, and I'll tag you in it, Jason, where Jason is our guest talking about how to get started in investing, which is a very pertinent topic at the moment with everyone going mad about. We really try on the Money Clinic podcast to speak to people with real life money problems and offer some insight into them. At the moment, I'm especially looking for people who are either planning on becoming parents, thinking about starting a family, perhaps have already got children and are worried about childcare options, or even people who are potentially embarking on what could be an expensive journey into fertility treatment. We really want to get some of these parenting issues on the podcast next. So if that's you, follow me, drop me a DM. We're first names only on the podcast. People will hear your voice, but they won't find out who you are. And we're really, really grateful to all of the people who have been on so far, and to all of our experts, including Jason. I hope we can get you back on another episode very soon.
Yeah, sure. That was that whiskey and water one?
Yes.
Yes.
Whiskey
okay, good. Great fun. Well, look, do check out the Money Clinic. It's fantastic, FT. And the FT does provide free content from time to time. And even if you try, do you know what? Pay the pound and try it for a month and just look at the depth of the quality of the content there. You know, putting aside my writing for them, they've got a fantastic group of real diverse people. It's not just for people who are ultra millionaires. If you want to get ahead, you've got to be around the right people, okay? And if you want to have a positive relationship with money, be around people who can actually give you pointers. It's not about being the highest earner or having the most wealth. It's about just being positive and doing the right things with your money. So, Claire, thank you for being on today. Really appreciate it. If people, as I say, follow Claire, she's super. She's so helpful and open. And just show us what that cup is. I want to see the last cup. Just want to see the cup. Just show us your cup there. Oh, like it. Very good indeed. So look, if you want to find the way to Claire's heart, you buy her a cup, preferably with a bird on it.
You know, I saw one of these outside my window. I've lived here for 15 years. I've never ever seen a woodpecker on the tree outside my window, and I saw one on Valentine's Day, which was a brilliant gift.
Great stuff. Claer Barrett, superstar, great friend. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
Good night, everyone, and thanks for everyone for being here. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.